ahead and start recording the session here. You don't see a PowerPoint at this point in time. I just thought I would present my desktop because I would like to bounce back and forth between the presentation and SMART. But hopefully everyone received the PDF of the presentation that we'll be talking about today in advance. So hopefully you have that. If not, let me know and we'll get you that later on. Let me get my desktop rolling here. Okay. I will not be able to see the chat box at this time while I'm doing this presentation here. And so if anyone has any questions, please just unmute your line and ask them. And then when we get to the point where I can switch over to SMART again, then I'll be able to check and see if there are any questions at that time. So, but today's presentation, we thought we would share a little bit of information per request, actually, by some of the different representatives from CSPs and case management organizations that have attended some of our trainings about this time-ish last year. This was one area that was requested for a webinar to share more information. We'll be talking about just the various review processes that we have, as well as SMART reports. Processes. Okay. These are mainly about choices, file review, or choices information. So HCBS choices. We did not get into CTS in this presentation at this time. And there's just a few tidbits of information about family support. So this is just mainly about choices. So we just try to keep that in mind. As we're going through, we'll start talking about the Department of Health inspections, the settings reviews that we're currently doing, policy review, policy implementation, also discussing the difference between the two, plans of enhancement, redetermination, and then monthly SMART file reviews, also breaking it down into remediation, and then we'll delve into SMART reports a little bit. Inspections, every 2 years or as new agency-owned properties arise, the division contracts with the Department of Health, otherwise known as DOH, to conduct announced site inspections. The different group homes, day program settings, those are areas that would be up for inspection. These visits occur between June 1st and February 28th. Most typically, I know a couple years ago, Department of Health ran a little bit late with their reviews, and I think they did some into March, maybe even into April. But that's when those will take place. So any changes that an organization has regarding their building lists, so if there's a new group home or one group home closes down, or if there's a new day setting, those changes need to be submitted to the assigned program specialist so that we can keep that updated, so that DOH, it's not such a change when we try to keep it updated over time instead of just a week or two before Department of Health comes on site. And there's information about whether the building is sprinkled and when it was built, etc. So the more time we have to get all that information, the better for everyone involved. Each property is assessed for adherence to authority in the following areas: fire drills, physical facility standards, food storage, kitchen equipment, both cleaning and handling, other hazardous conditions, and then personal cleanliness. I included just a little snippet of like the main screen, and I know everyone's looks a little bit different, but this is where you would find the inspections that are submitted. First of all, they would appear in your message center for that lead person at each organization. And I think someone, if you want to just mute your line, someone who just got on the line here. But each the lead people with the organizations, mainly CSPs, would be responsible for responding to and remediating the inspection information. So likely you already know where to find that, but it would be in that Find Inspections section here. And like I said, in the message center when it's ready for your response. Okay, with settings reviews, that's currently some information that we have been doing to assess on an ongoing basis residential and non-residential HCBS settings. The first cycle of these reviews more or less took place in 2014 for residential settings, and then now starting this past in 2017 here for non-residential settings. And there's certain criteria for each, and we have lists at this time of residential and non-residential settings. So initially we reviewed the settings, and then now on an ongoing basis we're going to do a sample during each policy implementation visit or as otherwise scheduled to assess those settings. And there's different criteria, like there's areas under autonomy, accessibility. If you have any detailed questions on that, you can feel free to email me about exactly what we're looking for with those. And then the initial round that we did then, we had phone calls to participants or their guardians take place as well, and the provider organizations share feedback also. On the ongoing ones, we are just going in and really looking at the setting and maybe chatting with a couple people who are on site. And then the sample size for this is based upon the volume of participants supported by each CSP. The results of these settings reviews are not entered into SMART. If there's question areas or remediation responses necessary, we will share that information specifically with the organization and get that feedback from you directly. Policy review is the next area that I wanted to touch on, and this is distinct from policy implementation review. There are two different types of reviews. I think the names are a bit misleading, whereas people sometimes think they're the same ones. So policy review is really just a review of the policies and procedures. This is done when a provider requests certification for the first time, and also on an ongoing basis. Accompanying documentation such as the med administration exam or I think bylaws are another area. Those are also requested, and I have a list here on the next slide or so. But that information is requested to kind of accompany those policies and procedures. On an ongoing basis, which needs to be done prior to the policy implementation reviews, ongoing policy reviews are conducted on any policies or procedures that have been revised since the last review. So thinking this is done every 2 years at minimum that we take a look at the policy review. Sometimes administrative rule updates are made, which would then require a provider to update their policies to make sure that you are in compliance. And really, at any time, if you choose to make an update to a policy for whatever reason, let's say your structure of your organization changes and it's a safety policy, and so now it's not reporting safety concerns to this person but here, and it requires a policy update as an example. Regardless of the certification cycle, even if it's your off year, we would still want those submitted to the division, really prior to those going into effect, so that we can, look them over. And we do enter those into SMART. There are certain SMART criteria for those as well. And then there's also a agree-disagree function that we can talk more about here with the monthly file review, but it really functions the same as far as you would agree or disagree to any citations made and then remediate any of the findings when necessary. One thing I forgot to mention right away is at the top of the SMART Choices main menu screen, it says select type of reviews, and here you will it should say file or CFCM or file or DSP. The reason behind having two of them was that initially we just used file for all of them, and in November when we incorporated the case management SMART information and separated out the DSP or CSP, I should say, but it does say DSP on here, when we separated those out, we have multiple types of reviews now. So always make sure when you're doing your drop down that you are on the right area, especially with a file review, because that will definitely impact what you can find and can't find. But here's the policy review list. I won't read through all of it, but A&E, retention of records, highly restrictive techniques, safety sanitation, med administration, that's a pretty big one, storage of medications, controlled substances, I should say, and then destruction. There's quite a few different policies and procedures here. And then this list is sent to the provider organizations prior to the policy implementation review each 2-year cycle, just as kind of a little reminder, like, hey, have you updated any of these policies? If so, let's get them submitted and take a look. But like I said, on an ongoing basis, if there's any changes made to any of these policies, please submit them, and we can look at those in a more timely manner. Okay, policy implementation. This occurs every 2 years, again, like I said, separate from policy review. We have a schedule for policy implementation, and we're really trying to kind of stick with which organizations are assigned for which months, and those are worked out, in advance with the provider organization here. And like I said, 2-year cycles, so the odd numbers of years, FY17, we're just wrapping those up now, and then FY18 we will be starting here this summer. There will likely be some changes made to the policy implementation reviews. We just really want to enhance the experience of being on site and really make that more rich for everyone. So we're willing to work on ways where we can enhance communication, various meetings, have more observation time by the division, or be able to provide more technical assistance. And so we'll have more information out on that in the future when we get some things narrowed down. But right now, up until this time at least, I will just share that it's largely an on-site review. Some of the information is already reviewed in advance of the visit. We may be reviewing more information here in Pierre before we go on site in the future. But we'll see how all that shakes out. These visits occur between July and March, and based on the volume of participants supported by an organization, we pull sample sizes for these areas: staff orientation, record retention, employee pre-service, in-service, and then service discontinuation elements, and also the employee screening that we'll talk about here shortly. So really it's the size of the review is based on, we review all the same information, but just the number of files in these different areas is based upon the population size of the provider that you are supporting. The little snippet here on the right shows the FIND policy implementation, and that's where you'd want to take a look to find that information. Okay, continuing on with that, it is an announced visit. Like I said, all of our reviews for what we're talking about here are announced. Scheduling, I mentioned, is arranged with the organization and the assigned program specialist, as well as any other division staff who might need to attend. Typically, one or both nurses come, and depending on the number of employee screenings, for example, or if you're one of the larger organizations and would have like 9 participant files reviewed, we might bring additional staff on board, and also for training purposes too. And some of that might change in the future here. Maybe while we happen to be there for a week, you'd really like some more information on critical incident reporting, for example. So then maybe I'd be tagging along to work on presenting some of that information, even though it's not typically my assigned organization, just as an example, or employment, or any other type of topic that might come up. But the program specialist assigned would be in contact with you all about that prior to your upcoming review this cycle. Right now, documentation that is reviewed before the on-site review does include injuries, and then all injuries, not just the critical incident reports, and then medication errors. The nurses look at all of those, not just the critical incident report med errors. Also in advance, we here at the division look at critical incident reports, discontinuations, a few other things. But some other pieces that providers would actually have to submit to us also could include the BIC human rights information, monitoring your A&E record retention, and then your subcontracts. And that would, really just give us an opportunity to look at that ahead of time so we could really enhance the experience being on site and make it more valuable for everyone. On-site activities typically will continue to include the med administration observation. That's where the nurses are going out and observing medication passes, which is very valuable, and I know they really enjoy doing that as well. And the employee screening, that could be something that is submitted ahead of time if an organization prefers, but oftentimes those records are kept pretty closely guarded, so that's something that typically we need to do when we're on site at a provider. Staff orientation, we're looking at, again, personnel files, so that might also be something we weren't going to continue to do on site, but currently we do. And then protection of records, which is the record retention by an organization, for participant files, I should say. The annual audit is also a component of the policy implementation review. And this comes from what Budget and Finance looks at, and they get this information in the beginning part of each year, I believe, and they provide us with the results for those elements and that element and those causal factors, and we pull those into the policy implementation review. At times, Budget and Finance, I think currently it's typically Elena that comes out, she will incorporate her service record reviews into the time that we are at an organization, just to cut down on our travel, and then, just to be on site at the same time. But that's not always the case, and then also the service record review information is not pulled into the policy implementation review. I think for a while it was thought that it does, but it actually does not. It's the annual audit that they look at, or that we look at. And then anytime there's a citation made in the policy implementation review, the provider would agree or disagree to any citations made and then remediate those findings, just like for monthly SMART file reviews and policy reviews. This is typically really an area that a lot of questions arise, so I thought I would kind of separate this out. The employee screening element of policy implementation. I did not break down every other element here, but I did choose to pull this one out since there are so many questions about it typically. And the employee screening breaks down into several different causal factors. The first is background check, and any participant or any staff person, hired before that 2002 date here, a criminal background check must be completed, and the background check needs to align with the policies and procedures for the organization. So if the organization has a policy or a procedure that says all staff must have a background check on file, and it doesn't address that time frame, then there would be that expectation that the background check is on file. I just heard a beep, so I wanted to make sure that we're still on the line here, but I think so. The OIG, which is the Office of Inspector General Screening, all employee files need to have documentation that there was a felony conviction check using the OIG exclusionary list. And then if there are any matches by a person's name, especially if it's a common name like Mary Jones, then Mary Jones' social security number needs to be checked to run against the exclusionary list, just to make sure that it's not the same Mary Jones that might be convicted for abusing a person who may be elderly in Florida, for example. and this is probably getting a little bit deeper than most people wanted to get today, but I just thought I would break it all down for everyone. Drug screening effective 2005, July 1, 2005. Drug screening for new employees must be completed. Kind of the same thing with that background check, where if the policy and procedure for an organization says that each employee must have a drug screening, then it would typically be the expectation that all employees should have that drug screening. Reasonable suspicion is also an area that we look at here, so anytime there is a reasonable suspicion case, the provider should follow their drug screening policy in that scenario. How we develop our sample for employee screening is that we get a list of all employees, which is generated by the provider, and then it's submitted to the division prior to the on-site review, and then a representative random sample is generated, and then we get that list back to the provider before the review so that you all have an opportunity to pull those files out of the filing cabinet, for example, or if you're limiting access in an online system, to be able to do that for us. And this used to take us a lot more time, I would say the first 2 years, but we've been very pleased the last couple rounds here of review. The employee screenings have gone a lot smoother. So that's been really good, because I know we look at a lot of employee packets while we're on site. The next area here, I thought we could move on to the plan of enhancement. These are generated in April. They have to have a provider response so that they can be approved by us, and that needs to be done by May 15th. So that certification letters can be generated. And again, this is an every 2-year situation, so you either have this done in your odd fiscal years or your even fiscal years. So for those organizations who just went through policy implementation review this past summer, fall, winter, those are now the ones that will be developing your PUE for, your plan of enhancement. Those who are up this next year in either the summer, fall, or even maybe spring, winter and spring, those organizations would be having a plan of enhancement next year. Their plan of enhancement, it really kind of wraps everything that we're doing throughout the full 2 years into this review, and it includes family support 360 findings if your organization has a family support program like that, and then John New is responsible for doing those reviews and getting that information ready, but we pull it into the same PUE, pulls in the Department of Health inspection, policy implementation results, we pull that in there as well, and then SMART review findings are also pulled in. So your ongoing monthly SMART file reviews, that information is pulled into your POE for a couple year range of time. And then I have one open here in a little bit when we look at reports, and so I can show you a little bit more about that here. Actually, no, it's on the next slide here, what we would see. And then an 86% threshold for compliance is set for the findings. But if there happens to be an area that is like right on that cusp, or that maybe has had a decrease in accuracy scoring in the last month or 2 or 3 before the generation of the POE, then a program specialist might have that discussion with an organization and decide to pull that into your POE as well. So let's say it's alternative services, and that's kind of taken a little bit of a slump. So let's pull alternative services into the POE so that we can address that on an ongoing basis as well. And here's a little snippet, and I didn't want to pull any organizations in here, so I just kind of pulled one and then changed it quite a bit here. So that's why it doesn't quite line up as nice as it would if I were to pull up an actual plan of enhancement. But the title of the POE is typically the year, and then the organization name, POE, provider name, then the date range. So for This PUE, which was created last year, it's pretty much close to a 2-year time frame, and these dates are typically pretty consistent from review to review. And that is the date range where it says review dates evaluated. That's the date range where we would look at the smart file reviews, CIRs, that type of information would be what we look at during this plan of enhancement. Your certification dates, that is the typical June 1 to May 31 2-year time frame. And so this is being created, or this was created in April, May-ish of 2016.